All right, Ezekiel 38:1. And the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, the me there is Ezekiel. Ezekiel's writing this, and he said, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man. I find it interesting that Ezekiel often refers to himself as Son of Man, when that was also one of the titles of Jesus, Son of Man, as well as Son of God. But God is talking to Ezekiel and said, Son of man, set thy faith against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him. Not prophesy to him, but prophesy against him. Now, in regards to this phrase, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, in the Septuagint, now the Septuagint was something, if you're not familiar with that phrase, the Old Testament was written in Hebrew. And by the days of Jesus, it had been translated into Greek, the whole Old Testament. The New Testament's written in Greek because Greek was much like the English language today. People throughout the world, there are some people in every country on this planet that know some American, some English rather. It's a universal language because we have so many tourists making so many people money that they got to learn a language to communicate with the tourists. And so it's when you're in America, you feel like Spanish is probably the most spoken language on the planet, but because you follow the money, English will be spoken at least in part by people all around the world. And but in those days, it was Greek. Because when Alexander the Greek conquered the whole then known world, he mandated that all of his kingdom learn a simple form of Greek, I imagine, so his soldiers could communicate with his subjects. And so when the Roman Empire overthrew the Grecian Empire, they didn't reinvent the wheel. They already had a way of communicating because the Romans had too, under the Grecian Empire, been forced to learn some simple Greek. Some people refer to it in commentaries as street Greek. And so consequently, the reason the New Testament was written in Greek, even though the language of the Hebrews is Hebrew, is because more people, the kingdom of God was branching out into the Gentile world, and more people understood Greek. And so for that same reason, the Old Testament written in Hebrew have been translated to Greek. And that translation was called the Septuagint. That's the name of that translation. So when Jesus quoted from the Old Testament, he might have used the Hebrew because he was primarily talking to the Jews. But when some of the New Testament translations are probably closer to the Septuagint, although Paul was a very educated man and could have written any way he wanted to, as the Holy Spirit led him. But that chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew there, it said, rather, the prince of wrath. So instead of the chief prince of Meshech, it was the prince of Rosh. Now, the Scythian Tauri in the Crimea were so called. The Araxes also was called Ross. The modern Russians have hence assumed their name as Moscow and Tobolsk, from Meshech and Tubal. So those words in the Old Testament, Meshech and Tubal, became two Russian cities, or cities of the Soviet Union when it was still the Soviet Union, called Moscow and Tobolsk, though their proper ancient name was Slavy or Wends. So that's a commentary, Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown, explaining who he's prophesying against. He's in essence prophesying against an area in that world, in Ezekiel's day, that much of Russia inhabits today. So, Magog, he said, prophesy against Gog, the land of Magog. Magog was a tribe on the Volga River, a river in Russia. Meshech means Moscow. Tubal means, in today's locations, means Romania, Bulgaria, Bosnia, Kosovo, and Turkey. So this is the area in today's world that Ezekiel was prophesying to. I bring that out because it appears that the prophecy of Ezekiel is going to be fulfilled in our days. And so he was told to prophesy against these ancient countries and cities that, in essence, up to now, in today's map, would be Moscow, a tribe of people on the Volga River, which is in Russia, and it would include satellites of Romania, Bulgaria, Bosnia, Kosovo, and Turkey. Now he said, here's what I want you to prophesy against them, in verse 3. And say, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Again, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal is referring to two cities in Russia, and Gog, again, refers to Ros, which was an ancient name of the area of Russia. So here's what he is telling Ezekiel to prophesy against that area of the world. Verse 4, I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armour, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. When I was a teenager in the Baptist church of my hometown, they had a visiting speaker. We would call him an evangelist today, somebody from out of town coming and speaking on a Sunday. And he was preaching on Ezekiel 38. And he was talking back in 65, 66, in that era, how the news, he brought newspaper articles, how Russia was buying up horses all over the world. And at that time, if you lived in the 60s and were studying prophecy, that was exciting to you, because this prophecy says these people from that area are going to invade Israel on horses. You're going to have all kinds of horses and horsemen. But as you study prophecy, you understand, whether it be the book of Revelation or here the prophecy of Ezekiel, that God speaks to the prophet in languages he can understand. And when the fulfillment comes, it comes with the things that would be compared in today's reality. So in that reality, people jumped on horses and rode into countries and attacked. They don't do that much anymore. Maybe in the Old West. But there's not a lot of jumping on horses and attacking. Some, I'm sure you can find some wars going around the world when people are jumping on horses and attacking. But that's not going to be a big war. Nowadays, we might talk about horsepower, whether it be in tanks, whether it be in cars or armor vehicles, whether it be in ships, whether it be in airplanes. Well, we're talking about the ways that we invade today, which were much different than the ways they invaded in Ezekiel's time. Now, let me ask you, and I've heard people bring this out about the book of Revelation as well, but let me ask you, what if God had showed Ezekiel a vision, or in this case told him to prophesy that, Russia, I'm going to put a hook in your jaw and I'm going to pull you and your friends into Israel, and you're going to attack with airplanes, tanks, Ezekiel said, what? So he used the language relevant to the day so they could understand it. And we have to understand that even though that Baptist preacher was excited about Russia buying up all kinds of horses in the 60s, I don't foresee any way, shape, or form that Russia's going into Israel on horses. And there's another thing we have to bring up to date when we get in, as we continue on in this. And we'll get to that in a bit. All right, so he said, I will turn thee back, put hooks into your jaws. In other words, you ain't got no choice here. You're going in. I'm prophesying against you. I'm about to judge you. And your end is not going to be a promising one. Now, that's not totally true. God is promising them what He's going to do. So it is a promising end, but not promising in the sense that they think of promising. He said, I'm going to put a hook in your jaws. I'm going to bring you forth. And He's going to talk about them invading. And He's going to talk about some of His helpers. Persia, Ethiopia, Libya. Ancient Persia today is Iran and Iraq. Iran and Iraq. Now that always discourages me when I think about that, because a lot of American soldiers died in Iraq to try to bring freedom to a Middle Eastern country. But it appears like they'll become an ally of Russia at some point instead of the U.S. Certainly appears that way to me. Then he talks about, he continues on telling Russia who else he's going to put a hook in their jaw and pull them into Israel. Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the North Quarters and all his bands. And he's not talking about rock and roll bands there. And many people with thee. Gomer, this one might blow your mind. Germany. In today's world, including the boundaries of Poland. Togarmah, that other one he mentioned there, the house of Togarmah, is Armenia in East Russia, which is probably the European part of Russia. So, he's talking, a lot of the allies of Russia are going to be Arab countries, but Poland and Germany, that is interesting. Some things are going to have there because Germany is a part of the European Union right now. So some things would certainly have to happen. Verse 7, still prophesying against these people. Be thou prepared and prepare for thyself, thou and all thy company that are assembled unto thee. And he's telling Russia, be thou a guard unto them. So he's saying, when these other countries go into go into Israel, be a guard to them. Now, one prophecy, commentator on Bible prophecy I read online earlier this week believes that Russia won't be going in like most people believe they will, but there will be the ones supplying and protecting all these people from America, and America would have to be willing to go to war with Russia to get involved. So that's how some people interpret that. Most prophetic teachers teach that Russia is going to go in as well. But whatever happens, God is putting a hook in their jaw, and they're going in. Verse 8, after many days thou shalt be visited in the latter years, or in the last days we could say, thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword, and is gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel, which have been always waste. But it is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely, all of them. So he's saying there's coming a last day, a time in the end, when Israel is going to take control of a barren land. Before Israel was there, it's like the rest of the Middle East, it was desert. Israel went in there with irrigation, and it became a land of plenty. That's why the Arabs want it back. Everything else is a desert out there, and here Israel's living in a beautiful area of the world because God blessed Israel. God said, you're going to inherit a land of milk and honey. And so now, after years, they've come from all over the world, out of many people, it says here. 1948, the League of Nations, the predecessor of the United Nations, the League of Nations, the leader of Britain, finally, not the guy who initially wanted to do it, who was a Christian. For many years, he wanted, Britain owned that area of the world. And he was a Christian, wanted to give it to the Jews. And I suppose he had politicians in his country fighting him, and it took forever. But in 1948, they finally got around to it. But Israel did not get what that former British leader wanted them to have. He wanted them to have the totality of all the promised land. But Lawrence of Arabia and others, when there was a war over there, helped Britain. And so the League of Nations persuaded England to reward them by giving some of that area of ancient Israel to the Arabs. And so the original guy who was a Christian, he wanted Israel to have it all, the Jews to have it all. The biblical land of Israel. By the time it was all done, and by the time all the politics were over, they just got a small portion of it. Israel, the entire nation's about the size of New Jersey, I guess. Not very big at all. I imagine Darrow could deliver stuff just about all through New Jersey in a day. It's just not a very big state at all. And that's the nation of Israel. But he said these people have been brought forth, gathered out of many people, out of many nations, and they're dwelling safely there. Now they're dwelling safely in the sense that there they are. I mean, they're constantly being attacked by the Palestinians. And you got countries like Libya who are saying, we'd like to blow them off the face of the planet. But at the moment, they're getting up tomorrow morning just like you are, and hoping to have a great day. So, verse 9, thou shalt ascend, who? These people he is prophesying against. Thou shalt ascend and come like a storm. Thou shalt be like a cloud to cover the land. Thou and all thy bands and many people with thee. Thus saith the Lord God. And it shall also come to pass that at the same time shall things come into thy mind, and thou shalt think an evil thought. People never think an evil thought. What's that all about? So Israel is going to be attacked by someone who thinks an evil thought. Most wars where we set out to conquer are the result of an evil thought. And that's what God is prophesying to these countries. In verse 11, here's the evil thought. And here's the other part of the prophecy we have to bring up to date. And thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, and having neither bars nor gates. Down below, Jerusalem's current walls were built under the orders of Suleiman the Magnificent between the years 1537 and 1541. Some portions were built over the ancient walls from 2,000 years ago. The walls were built to prevent invasions from local tribes and to discourage another crusade by Christians from Europe. They even withstood artillery fire during the War of 1948. The walls of the old city are 40 feet high and 3.8 kilometers or 2.36 miles around. The Ottoman Turkish Sultan had wanted the walls to enclose the southern city of David also. Next page. But the flip her over, in other words. But the architects failed to include Mount Zion or the city of David. As a result, Suleiman had the architects beheaded. Wasn't good not to do a good job in those days. There are 8 gates in the city walls today. Jaffa Gate, New Gate, Damascus Gate, Herod Gate, Lion's Gate, Golden or the Eastern Gate, Adung Gate, and Zion Gate. The old city is divided into 4 quarters: Armenian, Jewish, Muslim, and Christian. The enclosed area is called the Old City. The modern city of Jerusalem is much larger and includes a wider variety of businesses and residential areas across the Old City. Now that comes from a website called generationword.com. Now, note, I made a note here, bringing it up to date again. In Ezekiel's day, God was portraying to Ezekiel something he could understand. If you were going to attack the city without walls, it was much easier to attack. So to Ezekiel, not to Ezekiel, to the people Ezekiel prophesies against, God is saying you're going to go up to a place without walls. And yet we know parts of Israel has walls. Jerusalem, for example, has walls. That's not all of Israel, but it's a part of Israel. And they have walls. So why would God show Ezekiel to prophesy to the people living in the Russia of that day that these would be unwalled cities? Well, some of them are. But again, for the same reason he prophesied that they would be invading by horses. Horses, big armies on horseback, were a sign of much strength back then. You had large armies on horseback. You had something going for you. Now, this isn't even totally true, but let me say it. Now, people on horses are a little problem for people in airplanes.
For tanks.
And tanks. I say that, and I say it's not entirely true. Because America survived World War I and World War II. America survived the Vietnam, or the Korean and the Vietnam Wars. And we survived what in my day as a youngster was the biggest threat, the Cold War with Russia. Because the two countries, Russia and the USA, shared one thing. Each knew that a war would bring common destruction to both. Neither country wanted to die. So we stood around puffing smoke at one another and kept each other at bay. In today's world, we worry about North Korea with their nukes, but not much. One nuke would wipe them out. The biggest headache America has today is a bunch of camel riders. Is that amazing or what? All these countries with military strength, and the people that are given America with the most dangerous army on the planet, the biggest headaches are a bunch of camel riders. Because they're willing to put bombs in their body and walk into your malls and blow people up. They don't care if they die. They think they're going to get a great reward for dying. And then when they wake up on the other side, they're going to say, whoops, this didn't work out the way I planned. Because you don't get to heaven that way. But the point I'm getting at is, it's funny because I'm telling you, we're bringing all these prophecies up to date. But in fairness, these people who are a bigger headache to us than any military today, these Arabs. I call them camel riders, but the truth is they don't attack on camel. They just walk into places with bombs, into airplanes with bombs. Take airplanes, 9/11, take them over and fly them into buildings. So they still, even though I call them camel riders, that's not the way they attack.
Crazy.
But what about this unwalled city? Israel has walls, but the walls don't matter today, because you can fly airplanes over them and drop bombs. You can drive tanks through them. So, as Ezekiel understood unwalled to mean unprotected cities, the walls in Jerusalem do not change that. The warfare has changed. If God would turn His back, which He will not, if God were to turn His back on Israel, they could be overthrown in a day. Those walls would not serve them at all. In a day. By Russia, by China, by the U.S., in a day. Now, because God doesn't turn His back on them, 6 Arab countries attacked them in 1967 and backed off in 6 days. The 6th day, they said, we've had enough. 6 days. Israel caused all 6 of those countries, or the God of Israel caused all 6 of those countries to back off. And one of them was Egypt. That's a pretty good sized country compared to Israel. And Russia is going to find out the same thing. This city that seems inconsequential, this country the size of New Jersey, that seems inconsequential to Russia, let alone Russia with all these little helpers from Arab countries. And I'm still scratching my head. I'd like to sit down with one of these mainline Bible teachers that write books on Bible prophecy. What about Germany here? I'm not getting that one. But if indeed the guy who's comparing the maps, the ancient maps to today's maps, and saying that's Germany, if indeed that's true, then Germany's going to leave the maybe they won't leave the European Union, but they're going to betray them and help Russia, if indeed that's to be understood, or if indeed the individual who's calling these old cities by their modern names is right. These old countries by their modern countries' names is right. Because I'm scratching my head on Germany. I really am. The old Germany during World War I and II I could see, but today's Germany I don't quite see. But anyway, it'll play out. So he's saying, verse 12, this is the thought they have while they're going into Israel, to take a spoil and to take a prey, to turn thine hand upon the desolate places that are now inhabited, and upon the people that are gathered out of the nations, which have gotten cattle and goods, that dwell in the midst of the land. What spoil is Russia and her allies obeyed Israel for? Maybe the spoil Russia will be after is oil. It's possible that they will find a big oil reservoir there. Back in April 9th, hey, that's my birthday, in 2005, there was an article from CNS News in Mananat, Israel. CNSnews.com talked about an American oil company is relying on science and the Bible to find oil in Israel. The U.S.-based Zion Oil and Gas Corporation, led by an evangelical Christian, said it wants to help the Jewish state become energy independent. So they were reading, when Abraham blessed all of his children, one of the 12, I forget which one it was talked about oil in his future. And so this oil company when it talks about science in the Bible, believes in that area of ancient Israel where that country dwelt, from that Abraham's son, that tribe, that there's oil there. And they believe it to where they're looking for it. And so there are some Bible prophetic teachers who are teaching Israel's going to hit a giant load of oil one of these days. We'll see if that's true. Having said that, I put another note there. The Islamic allies of Russia will not need the hope of a spoil to attack Israel. They already want to wipe Israel off the planet, off the globe. So Russia might need some more incentive. I've got to get something for this. To help these countries do what they want, destroy Israel, I got to get something. And so maybe they have intel, or will have it soon, that there's a big oil pool to be had in Israel. We didn't know, just to bring this up to date, we didn't know until recently that the United States has more oil than the entire Middle East. We didn't know that until they found it in the Dakotas, and I guess that thing branches out to Montana. I mean, this is a recent discovery.
That's shale oil.
Yeah, and it works just like all the other oil. And you know the amazing thing, and we got more than anybody. And now we're a big country, but so is Russia. So there are other big countries, China. But we got more than anyone. We didn't know it. I'm saying that because the fact that they haven't hit a big oil thing in Israel doesn't mean they won't. So if indeed that's the spoil they want, then it will come to pass and they will find it. All right. Now, verse 13. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish with all the young lions thereof shall say unto thee, Art thou come to take a spoil? Hast thou gathered thy company to take a prey, to carry away silver and gold, to take away cattle and goods, or to take a great spoil? Ezekiel, this same verse in the NIV. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish and all her villages will say to you, Have you come to plunder? Have you gathered your hordes to loot, carry out silver and gold, take away livestock and goods, and to seize much plunder? Now, who are Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish? Who are the young lions? Now, there are two schools of thought. When I reread this note, I had forgotten all about this from the time I shared it years ago. The main pool of thought is that England is the lion. And it said here, who's going to do the talking? Somewhere in here it talks about, let me find this if I can. Sheba and Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish, and the young lions thereof, in verse 13. They believe that Tarshish is England, and then all of its, and Tarshish is the lion, and then the young lions. And they believe that's where the U.S. comes in, because we had our beginning from Britain. Our founders left England to found this country where they could have freedom of religion. So they say the U.S. will be one of the young lions that joins up with Britain. However, this note is a totally different look on it from Easton's Bible dictionaries. There can be little doubt, however, that this is the name of a Phoenician port in Spain, who are Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish. So Easton's Bible Dictionary says Tarshish is a Phoenician port in Spain between the two mouths of the Guadalquivir, the name given to the river by the Arabs, and meaning the Great Wadi, a watercourse. So then he goes on under BibleTrek.com goes on to say this: Columbus, sailing under the authority and flag of Spain, discovered America. Although Columbus was Portuguese, the ancient people groups of Sheba, Dedan, and Tarshish also settled in England, whose symbol is the lion. The USA could very well be the exact fulfillment of this prophecy, since we'd be known in our relationship with England as their strong lion. So one of them has it referring to Spain, but Columbus, though he never got to America, was given credit for discovering America while his ship was flying the flag of Spain. So some think that Spain is the lion and America is one of her young lions, but the majority think that England is the lion, and I'm not smart enough to know who's right. But anyway, wanted to share that, and then that other page that I gave you on the back side of that gives these names we talked about, and then tells you who they are in the those ancient names, who they are in today's world. And you can kind of look at that. And I didn't have time. I also had taken some other internet things here. I will look over that, and when we come back on this subject Sunday, I'll see what I want to include from that. But we're out of time tonight. But what I want to say in closing about this is you can see that many of the allies of Russia are her Arab neighbors. And the biggest thing that concerns a lot of prophetic teachers today, when I find them on the radio, every Saturday morning, by the way, if I look at my wife and say, what do you want from McDonald's for breakfast? From 10 to 10:30, there's a woman on there who teaches Bible prophecy, and she always has other guests on. And they talk about how things today are lining up with Bible prophecy. And there's some very interesting things there, and I'm forgetting why I brought her up right now. But hopefully I'll remember that by next time. But the point I want to get at, I heard when Al Martin was meeting with Lynn Agee and I on Friday mornings at initially on Fifth Avenue in that little seating area, and then when we moved out here, we'd meet. He would always bring little cassettes. How many of you remember cassettes? Yeah. He'd always bring little cassettes to play parts of during our meeting. And there are just, boy, my mind, you forgive me, my mind's wondering when I'm building up what I want to tell you right now. I'm forgetting.